Welcome back. It's Dr. Christopher Jackson, PhD, DOM, Florida, and you're listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonder.com. And there's so many elements to wellness. I've been talking about over the last few weeks sort of mindfulness related issues and ways to tune in to relaxing meditative states.
I must add, Doc, it's very needed because this week I've had 3 different people calling in with depression and, that are going to be listening to your show they're saying it's like something in the air. I mean, it's like the energy flow is just crazy.
Well, we have certainly a crazy environment in our country right now, and a lot of admonishment going on from the rest of the world of some things being said, regarding some things being said. But that kind of negative environment doesn't help.
Nope.
But beyond all that stuff, the political mess, we each kind of take care of our own and ourselves. We need to be able to focus on helping ourselves into relaxing kind of, relaxation response to all of this kind of thing. The mindful, relaxing, taking it all in stride in a way that it's not like we're being stoic exactly, but taking it in perspective is probably a better way to put it, putting it in perspective. And there are a lot of issues that can relate to being stressed and being, in environments that have a lot of chaos or controversy going on and this kind of thing. And there's a lot of that kind of thing going on right now in the news. And so how do we address all these things? Well, one of the more fundamental ways that we make sure we are on a path to wellness is by addressing our nutritional needs. And there are standard approaches, over-the-counter kind of things that people are buying. They're going to their CVS and buying, basically just, let's just say, not as efficacious, not as effective forms of nutritional supplements that they may be picking up as we use in practice. And so there was an article a while back, like a year or two ago, New York Times, saying that people were throwing their money away on nutritional supplements. And I sort of agree with some of that, because people are purchasing the things that are available at their corner drugstore, which are commonly not very effective, not at decent levels to actually have an effect in the body. And also they're doing it blindly quite often, because conventionally it's hard to get the right tests done to assess one's nutritional makeup and therefore address needed areas of nutritional supplementation, if you want to use that term. And that's really the supplementation end of it, or supplements are the over-the-counter things you get at, maybe even an herbal store, which tend to be a little more effective than the corner, chain drugstore or a natural food store. They tend to be more effective, the natural food store, herbal stores, but they're still not hitting the level of not nutritional supplements, but nutraceuticals, which are essentially pharmaceutically derived or characterized nutritional substances that are tested molecularly and characterized very precisely to make sure that everything that's supposed to be in there is in there. That's one aspect of it. And then they're created in ways that ensure absorption. And the most effective ones that I've used in my practice for years, initially I sort of did a search when I first opened my practice. I started to realize what I was doing was I was sending people to some of these stores and saying, pick this up, and they'd ask me, well, what brand should I get? And I might mention some brands that I thought would be fairly effective. And as I did my searches for the most effective approaches, I learned the difference because I started to find some very, very, very effective routes to getting the nutritional needs met of people, and addressing their actual deficiencies in their bodies and that kind of thing. So, and there are very deep relationships between nutrition and the health of our bodies. And it's not just the point of view of nutrition that I'm coming from. I'm not just coming from the point of view of a nutritionist. I'm coming from the point of view of a physician. I'm coming from the point of view of how the body works and understanding how it works and how these nutritional substances are interrelated with physiological health or physiological homeostasis is a commonly used term. And that's basically becoming balanced, getting into a state of nutritional and metabolic wellness and balance. And so what I did early on was I explored some different options. I talked to some of the more common nutraceutical companies and wasn't really sold on some of them. I didn't think that they were quite hitting the mark of what I was looking for. And then there were the ones that were so focused on the use of glandulars, it was just a little bit stomach turning. And I won't mention any specifically, but because I don't want to bash them, but just my take on it is, we don't need to put a piece of every gland in a cow's body or in a pig's body into a formula to make it effective. It's ridiculous. If we can come up with the really true root bases of our body's own production of many of these nutrients, that's one of the aspects I want to aim for. And then there are interrelationships within the physiology of our bodies, and especially the physiology of the bodies of patients I treat or the conditions that I'm addressing with these patients. And I'm kind of working my way down deeper here into this discussion, but it's kind of a deep subject, obviously. And so what I looked for in terms of effectiveness was and is the most effective route. And, people who are in the medical industry are pretty familiar with isotonics. And isotonics basically are going through a route that bypasses the normal digestive route through, being dissolved in the stomach and then broken down and then over hours usually for these nutritional supplements that are available over the counter. and directs the substance, the nutritional substance, through the stomach, but not sitting in the stomach. In other words, the substance goes right through the stomach and into the intestinal tract, because it has the appearance of a body fluid that's processed like a body fluid in the normal process of things that in the normal response for the stomach. In other words, the stomach's response to body fluids is to allow them right through and into the intestinal tract, as opposed to substances that need to be broken down, generally over hours, and may not be even highly absorbed. Let's say they're fairly marginally absorbed generally. Somewhere between 20 and 30% might actually be absorbed into the body of these standard over-the-counter substances that are available, or these standard over-the-counter supplements, the vitamins, minerals, different kinds of nutrients that are sold over the counter in the corner drugstore, or even in the herbal or natural food store. Those generally tend to be prepared in a way that they break down more easily and are more bioavailable, yet they still don't really hit the mark for the kind of effectiveness that I'm looking for when I'm treating somebody who has a deficiency that is, in a lot of cases, dramatically affecting their health. I need to be able to turn that deficiency around quickly. And in some cases, it is life-saving, because in some of those cases, they have extreme deficiencies that can affect their ability to, like, for example, in iron, extreme anemia that can affect their ability to, create the oxygen carrying capacity. It gets that oxygen throughout their body appropriately and keeps them going, keeps their body functioning properly. Then there are some of these others, some of the other nutritional substances that our bodies require that affect our metabolism, affect our immunity, affect inflammatory conditions, affect our health in so many different ways, and the absence of which can open the door to attacks that are known as autoimmune responses, where our own immune systems attack our own bodies, our own body processes, and so we get these inherent kind of automatic responses when certain levels aren't appropriate. One of the key ones in that area is vitamin D. Vitamin D is very much involved in the monitoring and in the, not so much monitoring, but the control, the modulation, that's the word I was looking for, the modulation of the T helper cell response involved in the immune system. And much of that response is very dependent on having adequate levels of vitamin D. So when we don't have adequate levels of vitamin D, then what can happen and tends to happen is that those helper cell levels get out of balance. They get out of a condition of homeostasis and into an imbalanced condition. And so we end up with autoimmune responses because things are out of balance. And so in order to address that, then obviously we want to address, one, the vitamin D level and bring it into a a more optimal range so that we can help the body come back into balance. Now, it may take deeper levels of therapies to address that as well. And when I talk about therapies there, I'm talking about nutraceuticals of a different nature, like, for example, homeopathic substances or homeopathic medicines that are addressing the actual substances involved in the control and the balance of the immune response. And that is a very, to my way of thinking, a very advanced kind of medicine. I know that there are many corners that kind of dismiss the activity of homeopathic solutions, but they're probably not familiar with what I'm talking about, because what I'm talking about is not classical homeopathic approaches. What I'm talking about is very sophisticated, biomedically based, in many ways, low dose therapies that have actual very important substances within them, and that are broken down into levels, into zones of acceptance by the body, where their dosage levels and their specific quantities that are brought into the body work well at the cellular level in terms of getting into and out of cells as needed. So we can directly address some of the ramifications of the immune system getting out of where it needs to be, out of the range that it needs to be working in, and address that right on that level, right on that cellular level where it's all happening. We can bring in substances at that level that counter the negative effects that are occurring and help to steer the body back into an area that is more functional and more balanced. And that gets pretty deep. I'm trying to avoid some of the terminology just to kind of give an overall explanation of what kinds of things can be done without getting into all the details, but to give you kind of an overview of approaches that can be taken to address these things. So we have not just nutraceuticals, although that's a big just. It's I'm not minimizing the importance of nutraceuticals. I think they're extremely important. And the way that we get those nutraceuticals or the nutritional substances within the nutraceuticals into the body matters tremendously. You know, when I'm talking about the isotonic approach, you know, in 5 minutes, 95% being in the bloodstream is phenomenal. You can't beat that with anything except an intravenous injection or an infusion. So, you know, that's extremely effective. And I think it beats, you know, shooting up with a needle full of nutritional substances all the time, right? If you can just have a drink that gets it into you, if it's mixed correctly under the right circumstances, whether it be an empty stomach or a full stomach, depending on what it is. I think that beats other kinds of solutions. I know it does, because I've seen the results. And so examples of these kinds of things include Nutrimetrics. Nutrimetrics is a brand that is kind of a sub-brand of a larger scale company, but very, very effective approach to addressing nutritional needs that can help to rebalance the body. And Anne Marie was mentioning something about some people she had spoken to that had some issues with depression and so on. And one of the common roots to that, well, actually there's several, but let's say a couple of them here, would be one of the common areas is vitamin D. That's, again, vitamin D deficiency can affect our moods. Vitamin D is more than just a vitamin, it's actually a hormone. And it's involved in both hormonal processes as well as immune processes and other things as well, like, specifically in terms of calcium metabolism, helping conditions like osteoporosis, many things. But one of the things it's known for is the sunshine vitamin, right? Vitamin D is what is supposed to be produced by your body when you're exposed to sun. However, for various reasons, including enzyme activities that aren't effective, but others as well, like, for example, we have a real focus on reducing cholesterol in our society. Yet the same studies that talked about the incidence of heart attacks at high levels of cholesterol showed that the same thing happened at very low levels of cholesterol. So the problem is there's so much focus on reducing it that it then gets into an area where hormones and hormone production can be affected by the level of cholesterol that we have in our bodies. And that can therefore affect moods. It can affect many facets of hormonal interaction in our bodies. So we want to, I don't want to get into all the details of that. I've covered plenty of all of those kinds of things when I've talked about hormones and so on. But vitamin D is really important in terms of helping people be in balance, helping hormonal balance. And then additionally, there are some other substances like magnesium. Magnesium is a precursor, one of the precursors to creating dopamine, which helps to give us more of a positive outlook as well. It's a neurotransmitter that's very important to our positive outlook. And other substances like tyrosine. L-tyrosine is an amino acid that's a precursor to creating dopamine as well. So there are nutritional substances that can affect our mood. They can affect mood in terms of depression, anger. They can affect levels of anxiety. All of these things can be rooted in nutritional imbalances. And then beyond that, they can be systemic. They can be states that we maintain because those nutritional imbalances have not been addressed over a long period of time. And this is part of the problem with simply the Band-Aid approach of, we'll give you this drug that's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor or agonist or this kind of thing that might be leading to elevated levels while you take the drug, but then you get off the drug and of course you have become somewhat dependent by that time and go into deep depression or something along those lines, or the anxiety returns. And if we actually address the root cause, we can get obviously a much longer term result and improve the health of the individual as well, because by finding that root cause, we found a piece of the overall puzzle that makes us us. So we can address the actual deficiencies that may be there and in some cases excesses. You know, like we can modulate or modify the levels, like if somebody's excessive in iron, for example. If they got too much iron, that can lead to disorders, or at least disorders resemblant of hemochromatosis, which is involved in iron being at too high a level in the tissues and being absorbed into the organs and this kind of thing, causing a lot of problems. It can make one appear to have arthritis. Arthritis can be kind of the symptomatic look of it, yet it may actually be due to iron levels being too high. You can appear to have diabetes, or you can have glucose regulation issues. There's a lot of problems that can happen if you have too much iron. So sometimes an excess needs to be addressed as well. But the majority of issues that I find that are affecting people's health are related more to deficiencies than excesses. So finding something that works well is effective and addresses the needs that are actually there in the body, as opposed to simply treating the symptoms or addressing the symptoms that somebody's going through. That's the route to true wellness. And it actually also addresses issues of aging, which I've talked about in the past as well. What we call aging, or what I call the syndrome of aging, where we have this outlook that, we all have to be, broken down old granny who's walking around with a cane and hunched over and all this kind of thing. It's a ridiculous model that is simply accepted by our culture. It doesn't have to be like that. We can go through our lives and have good health, but we have to address these needs. And the problem is, the longer it takes us to address them, the more the accumulative effect occurs, and the more that we see these signs and symptoms that we associate with aging. But since no one individual has the same signs and symptoms as another individual, we all have our different ways of seeing signs and symptoms of aging, what we call aging. We can see that it's not a matter of aging. It's not a matter of, just a natural process that we go through. No, it's rooted in how we treat ourselves when we're younger and how well nourished we are when we're younger, and not eating a bunch of crap that's out there that's very available in the United States and certainly has spread throughout the world. And as the United States, as the standard American diet has spread throughout the world, the health of other countries has gone down because they're eating the garbage that has started at the United States. And so we have this standard American diet spreading throughout the world and ruining the health of other countries. It's just spread crazily. So all this fast food approach to things has a lot of problems, and causes, or at least is related to, a lot of the health issues that we see. So if we're getting proper nutrition throughout our lives, if we're addressing our nutritional needs adequately, we're less likely to see problems that are associated with these deficiencies. And that's not a simple thing anymore, because it used to be that we had adequate nutrition through the diet, especially through plant-based diet, especially through plant foods that have so many antioxidants and various kinds of vitamins and minerals, that we would be able to meet those nutritional needs. However, with the advent of the agricultural model that included NPK soil, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in the soil as the primary ingredients of fertilizer, basically they knocked off the charts about 70 other nutrients that are needed for plants to develop appropriately and for plants to develop their own defenses, to produce chemicals on their surfaces and put off by those plants that would fend off pests. And so, of course, with the advent of NPK soil and the agricultural approach that left many nutrients out of our foods, because those plants couldn't defend themselves appropriately, then we had the opening up of an industry of pesticides. And so now we needed these pesticides to fend off the pests from the plants. So we're spraying these pesticides on the food that we are then digesting, many of them neurotoxins, many of them xenoestrogens, throwing off our hormonal regulation, toxic to our nervous systems. These kinds of substances are consumed by people who are not eating organic. And in fact, even those who eat organic often are getting some of these substances as well, but nowhere near the levels of the non-organic or conventionally grown foods. And I say they're getting some because in testing, when we look at organic foods, we find that some of these substances get into the plants because the neighboring farm has been using them, or the soil may have some in it from prior farming days, or this kind of thing. But generally speaking, it is much better to go organic because you're getting the nutrients that we used to get in the food because the farming is done differently. And we have a better outlook as far as meeting our nutritional needs. So one of the things that I do my utmost to ensure is that my kids get organic food. I do my best to ensure that they're not getting many of the sort of bastardized or really modified foods, like that have gone through genetic modification, for example, GMO, genetically modified organisms that are full of pesticides, all of these kinds of things. If you go organic, you're generally avoiding the majority of those substances, as opposed to going with the conventionally grown foods that are full of pesticides, are full of many substances we don't want in our food. And the reason they're there is because we're growing those conventionally grown plants in ways that don't allow them to produce the chemicals that would naturally fend off the pests. So it's a really kind of, what's a non-crass way of saying screwed up? I have no idea, but it's a mess. And so we have this source of food conventionally that's full of these substances that are toxic to us and produce deficiencies, messing up our hormones, creating inflammatory conditions within our bodies, and not providing the nutrients that we need to maintain homeostasis, to maintain a state of wellness in our bodies. So in order to be on a path to wellness, and I'm not saying that everybody's going to instantly become well, because there's many issues to be addressed, and there's a cumulative effect. But when you start really addressing, really looking for the underlying issues that are involved, and addressing them directly, then you start to see a natural progression which reverses many of the conditions that have been created by this accumulative effect of omitting the needed substances from the diet, or not having enough of those substances, deficiencies, or having an imbalance of those substances, or having toxic foreign or alien substances be part of our diet that create many of these conditions. So we have conditions like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, created how? Through exposure to Roundup. We have substances in the food. It's not a commonly known statement that, just as smoking has a very strong relationship with lung cancer, the consumption of standard nitrate-full lunch meats has a very strong relationship with colon cancer, similar to smoking and lung cancer. So we get these foreign substances, or these substances that lead to further processes that lead to the development of cancers and other similar disorders, inflammatory disorders. So really getting to the root of these things, we can address those situations and those conditions and help ourselves out. So back to the original subject of this discussion. Nutraceuticals can address a part of this, right? With nutraceuticals, we can address deficiencies that are created through the imbalance that's created by these toxic substances, by foods that are produced using standard conventional agricultural approaches nowadays, that are deficient in many of the nutrients. And I've seen all sorts of studies and discussions about how, a peach today versus a peach 50 years ago, has so much less of certain nutrients, this kind of thing, all these different things about plants that have so much less nutrient content than they used to. So by addressing these deficiencies, by directly targeting them and addressing them, we can create an approach, or at least we can create a state of wellness over time as we reverse those situations. And that affects many, many things. As a good example that I see a lot of, there is a process that occurs when we look at thyroid function. And typically, these kinds of things aren't tested in a conventional office. Okay, conventional medicine doesn't address this level of function typically. And that is, for example, the functionality of thyroid, not just the thyroid itself, but the breakdown of thyroid hormone from the macro level, which is known as T4, to the more available level, which is T3. T4, thyroxine or tetraiodothyronine, versus T3, which is triiodothyronine. What happens there is there's a process that occurs through the use of certain enzymes. These are selenoenzymes. They're enzymes that are formed in the presence of selenium. And the lack of availability of that selenium because of an inadequate diet can commonly affect the ability to break down T4 to create enough adequate levels of T3. Yet, generally speaking, the conventional assumption is that your body's taking care of that. So the assumption is if you're given Synthroid, which is a synthetic T4, then your body's going to take over and break it down properly and give you an adequate level of T3. But that often turns out not to be the case. And that's often not the case because the nutritional balance isn't there and the nutritional levels, and it's not just selenium, but selenium, zinc, and some other cofactors that help you produce enzymes that are involved in this process. And in some cases, there are additional aspects to this as well, like I was talking about vitamin D levels and the effect on the immune response and autoimmunity. And there is a component of this as well, like if your vitamin D level is inadequate, or even if you have a reasonable level of vitamin D, but your receptors for vitamin D aren't adequately formed, then you may be susceptible to attacks from your own immune system. And one example of this is Hashimoto. Hashimoto is a condition, it's an autoimmune condition, typically involving the thyroid, that is essentially attacks on thyroid function or the functions that relate to thyroid hormone production, would be a more accurate way of putting it. Because they affect this function, then they affect your ability to create adequate levels of T3, which, by the way, can also affect your moods. And it certainly affects your metabolism. So, without that proper balance, without the T helper cells being balanced correctly, perhaps because the vitamin D is not at an adequate level, or your receptors are poor, and therefore your vitamin D absorption is not going to work very well because it's not an adequate level for you, then that can affect the balance of T helper cells and therefore lead to this autoimmune response that then leads to an attack on thyroid function, or at least the function of the enzymes, or the availability of the enzymes and all of this kind of thing, that leads to a problem with breaking down the thyroid hormone and therefore affecting your metabolism and reducing the levels of T3 that are available and this kind of thing. So we have many aspects to lead to the malfunction of our systems, our metabolisms, due to nutritional issues, basically, that come down to. So that's really getting to the root of things. And certainly there is that genetic component as well. As I was mentioning, if your vitamin D levels may seem adequate, but your receptors may not be adequately formed, and therefore your absorption of vitamin D may not be appropriate in terms of modulating your immune response. as I said, I can get pretty deep here, but so we, that's truly addressing things at the root when we go to that level. And this is what I consider real medicine, by the way, actually addressing the root cause as opposed to simply addressing the symptoms. So by addressing the root cause, we can turn things around. If we're constantly just treating symptoms, then all we're doing is allowing the same processes to continue without changing the direction. We're just masking it.
Can I, to make sure that everybody understands that it's not that you're totally opposed to Western
Oh, no,
medicine.
not at all.
And when we say treating the Western medicine also treats the cause. However, all they do is handle it systematically on a short-term level, more to speak.
In a lot of cases, conventional medicine does not address the cause.
You think?
Yeah, a lot. A lot of it is just addressing symptoms. And it's partly because it's framed around emergency medicine. I mean, the structure of it is built around emergency protocols. And so we have a very good way of approaching this, which I've talked about for years, is integrative medicine, right? Taking the combination of the two approaches and working them together. For example, if you have somebody who has a life-threatening situation, conventional medicine typically is a very good approach. It's geared around emergency response, emergency medicine. So you bring them back by addressing the symptoms, changing that situation so that the person is doing better. Absolutely. You bring them back because you're saving their life. Once you're to that point where they're stable and things are continuing to maintain stability, then you can start looking deeper into the root cause and address it. And when I'm talking root cause, it's really, I think, probably deeper than what conventionally is thought of as root cause, because I'm talking about things that are happening at not only the cellular level, but a lot of the nutritional aspects, the cellular messenger aspects of what's going on, these kinds of things, really getting to the root of not only what's happening, but why. So I can see from some points of view, conventional medicine addresses root cause sometimes. But I don't consider it, for example, addressing root cause to remove a tumor. The tumor is not the cause. Cancer is not the cause. Cancer is a symptom. It's something that's gone wrong in the body that's allowed the mutation to occur, that's allowed the mutation to thrive. So removing the cancer doesn't remove the root cause. And the same idea with cardiovascular issues, right? People go in and get a bypass, and guess what? They need another bypass in 5 years. Why? Because nobody's addressed the root cause. They had their bypass. That's the condition that they created within their bodies by not addressing their needs appropriately and by consuming things that are pretty bad in terms of their effects on the body. And I've talked about many of those things in the past. But certainly fast food is one of the big bugaboos as far as I'm concerned. That can lead to, if you got a very strongly fast food diet, you're going to be highly likely to create a situation that leads to cardiovascular disease. That's one of the big areas of it. in response to that kind of thing. But, so you don't just, tear a few veins out of somebody's leg and throw them in and wrap them around the heart and then say, oh, you're cured, because guess what? The cause hasn't been addressed, and, sometimes cholesterol is an issue, but why is cholesterol an issue? Why is the cholesterol a problem? Well, that was created by consumption of the wrong foods, for one, and or could be related to other conditions, metabolic conditions, thyroid function. Many things can affect cholesterol and can create blockages. And a lack of certain things can lead to that as well. Boy, something just fell. But anyway, so addressing the root cause means going pretty deep. And typically, with the confines of conventional medicine, there's a very short window of time, for one, because it's high volume, short duration. Addressing each individual means that each individual may not have all of their needs addressed, may not have all of the issues addressed, and it may take longer to address what needs they have because it will be in multiple visits instead of one or two, this kind of thing. So I think the best system is one where we all work together to address the needs of each individual. And, in cases where there's an acute issue, certainly conventional medicine does well, where it's an emergency, that sort of thing. But when we're talking about chronic issues, I think getting more deep into the root cause, getting more into nutritional deficiencies, getting more into aberrant function at the cellular level, this kind of thing can be very useful and is very effective at addressing things and turning people around long term, whereas continuing to put drugs into their bodies that are damaging and have all sorts of effects that are problematic and create a lot of collateral damage, basically, is not a great long-term solution. Whereas we can go more naturally and use solutions that are body-friendly, that work with your body, that don't create additional issues or problems health-wise, and that help you reach a state of wellness as opposed to simply a state of maintenance. In other words, where you're simply maintaining a sort of a facade of wellness where you appear to be okay, where you're maintaining certain levels, but in terms of functional levels, but you're not really thriving. So anyway, that's a deep subject and I could go on into it more and more. But going back to the overall topic, nutraceuticals and how they're different. Nutraceuticals will address the levels that you need, will get them there effectively, will have a quick response and turn things around more rapidly than if you're simply taking nutritional supplements over the counter. So on that note, you've been listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. And thanks for listening. The show is named after my practice, which is named after a philosophy, A Path to Wellness. And if you'd like to check that out, it's at www.apath aptw.net. That's short for, obviously, A Path to Wellness, aptw.net, aptw.net. And you can call us at 727-329-9637 if you'd like. Thanks for listening.